Hello and welcome back to the Lynn Lowdown. I'm Danny Vittori, and today we welcome back on Aaron Clausen from the Planning Department. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Great. So we'll jump right into it. A big thing you want to focus on is the new parking strategy that you're unveiling for downtown. You want to give people a little intro of it?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. The downtown parking strategy is one of our bigger planning processes right now. And the origin of that project came out of Vision Lynn, which was the comprehensive plan we talked together about a little while back. But as you might recall, we had identified in the comp plan these growth districts, these areas where we want to see new development in the city, broken down into two different types. You had a transformed district and an enhanced district. And the downtown is a great example of one of those enhanced districts whereby we want to see new development infilling in vacant spots, but is sort of supporting and complementing the character of that place, in this case, the downtown. And what we heard consistently, and we've seen, I think, both just in, as I move through downtown, that there's a need to really figure out how to optimize our parking, our public parking policies, to not just support the existing businesses, residents, and other institutions that call downtown their home, but also make sure that we're developing a parking strategy that supports future growth.
And that's a large project. I mean, you do specialize in large projects, but what's the process been like so far? How has it worked?
Yeah, so we brought on a consulting firm called Stantec about 6-7 months ago. They're really they're focused on this kind of work. They've done a lot of different parking strategies in downtowns and other urban areas. But the process looks very similar to many of the other planning work we do, whereby we do a lot of existing conditions analysis. We do a lot of engagement with the community to collect qualitative information, to understand people's experiences, and then take and sort of assess what we have there and formulate responses, actions and strategies that can address those, what we're seeing as potential barriers or opportunities. So in this process, we've had some pretty good engagement with online surveys, a couple public workshops, open houses, and then stakeholder engagement. And then as part of the existing conditions analysis, Stantec goes out and they take an in-depth inventory of what is the parking facilities in the town, both on-street or off-street, public or private. What's the infrastructure supporting those, like signage, meters, that sort of thing, just to get a sense for what is going on. And I think the one thing we've heard pretty loud and clear from the beginning of this process is that the parking program right now isn't really serving anybody very well. There are places where we can see that people have pretty adequate access to parking, but the surveys were pretty clear that we need to think through another alternative. But what we did find in the existing conditions analysis, part of that inventory is Stantec goes out and actually counts all the cars during certain times of days and days of the week. Okay. And so what they found is that we actually have a decent amount of supply. So there's a little over 7,000 parking spaces in the study area downtown. And overall, the peak day, peak time, which was I think a Thursday midday, there was about, I think it was 58% utilization. So that speaks to some availability there. And also just to sort of, that's the overall data. There's about 65% utilization for public on-street and off-street parking. So still some capacity to work with. But what we also found, aligned with the feedback we heard in the survey, is that there are very much hot spots in the downtown where parking utilization is at capacity, or in some places even above, like Mount Vernon and Exchange Street, Central Ave, City Hall. I think you and I've talked a little bit about. So there's spots that are really super busy, but there are areas where there's quite a bit of capacity to work with.
Yeah, so I was really surprised when I was reading that, the capacity. And do you have, I guess, a number that you'd like to reach, a capacity you'd like to reach? Maybe can't get 100, but right. What's the goal?
Yeah, that's a great question. Generally speaking, what we shoot for, our target for utilization is around 85% of utilization. And the thinking behind that, or the logic behind that, is that what 85% utilization will mean is that at any given block on-street parking space, there will be at least one space available. So as you're driving along trying to find a parking spot close to your destination, you're very likely to find this space within that block. Same goes for off-street parking. If you know you're going to be in downtown for some time, you don't need to park on the street. You can find an off-street parking space pretty simply within walking distance. So that's the target utilization. And based on what we found, we've got a little bit of room to work with. We just need to sort of manage that a bit better.
And you said you're about 6 months into this process. What are some of the next steps going into this? Yeah,
so we just had our second public workshop a couple weeks ago with an open house. I think it was last Tuesday. We are currently reviewing draft recommendations that Stantec has put together for us. We unveiled those at the workshop, and online on the Lynn in Common webpage, we have a survey with information. If you want to dig into it a little bit, you can give us some more feedback, and I'll talk a little bit more of that later. But essentially, there's 4 general areas that Stantec has created recommendations for us, with about 20 to 25 recommendations to consider. And it really revolves around this idea of creating a bit more flexibility in the parking regulations and in managing demand through pricing, so that it's more flexible and responsive to how people actually park downtown. So for instance, just as an example, one thing we've heard is that in the survey, a number of folks who responded said they left downtown earlier because they were going past their 2-hour on-street parking limit. So they actually left downtown rather than spending more time here, maybe spending more money. We want to get rid of that incentive. We want to create an incentive for people to stay as long as they desire. So really looking at removing time restrictions across the board and using pricing as a way to incent different parking behavior. So if you want to park on street right in front of the store you want to go to, maybe it's a little bit more expensive because that's more convenient. But if you're willing and able to park off-street within 2 or 3 blocks, it would be much less expensive, much less sort of overhead in terms of when and where and how. And by doing that, you're able to sort of spread out that utilization across your whole resource area.
And even what you said about the timing, I mean, I've even sometimes been in places where I go, okay, how long am I going to be here? Is it going to be longer than the 2 hours? And that'd be interesting if you didn't have to think about that as much.
Right. I mean, it creates a little bit of anxiety. You came downtown to do some things, and now you got to keep an eye on your watch. And if you go 5 minutes over, you could have a $25 ticket. We would rather create more flexibility for the parking user so that they could pay for 3 hours and say it's $3 for that 3 hours, but there's no concern. So that's a piece of it. The other piece is looking at how can we make sure that it's easy to understand. The signage, wayfinding, access to parking lots is more available to a broader user type. So, because right now, some off-street parking lots it's very restricted to license holders. So those are some of the recommendations that we're working through at the moment. Once we get feedback by the end of this week, I think it's Friday the 28th, Stantec will take those recommendations, refine them a bit, and turn it into an implementation strategy.
Okay. And when would you expect to see that?
Yeah, we hope to have the plan completely done by the end of summer, early fall, and there'll be some more engagement with policymakers, whether it's the City Council, the Parking and Traffic Commission, Off-Street Parking Commission, to make sure everybody sort of understands what is built into the plan and why it's a solid approach to dealing with what we have.
And I know that we do have to wrap up in a moment, but you'd mentioned that you wanted to circle back to the survey as well. Where can people find it? What's asked of them? Yeah,
thank you. Perfect. This is a great plug. So again, by the end of the week, we're still receiving comments on those recommendations. On the webpage, it's linnincommon.com/parking. there's a survey there where folks can respond to every single recommendation, whether they like it or don't like it. But we also ask for qualitative feedback. So any detail, it's helpful for us. We learned a lot in the surveys. We had over 300 responses to our survey. Wow. And it helps sort of build context for developing the response to or creating a strategy for making sure that there's parking downtown.
It adds context to all of the numbers piece of the data.
That's right. Yeah, you've got a lot of numbers, and you also need to understand what the real world experience is.
And I will say, before I wrap up in a moment, was there anything else you wanted to mention that I hadn't touched upon?
With the parking strategy, no. I just as we wrap that up, I'm excited to see how folks feel about this. I think it's a great strategy. The other thing I would add to it, just before we talk about a couple other items, is that it's a iterative process. What's important about the solutions that are being proposed here is that we continually assess what the utilization is, because we may find 2-3 years down the line that we need to start looking at creating more parking, because hopefully we're seeing more people coming to our downtown as a regional destination. We really want to support that idea. So it's iterative, and I think this is a first step to really coming up with a flexible and dynamic parking response.
Great. Well, you've done a great job of explaining it for all of us to understand it who are not in the parking planning strategy. But I want to thank you again for coming on and talk about it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course, anytime. And once again, I'm Danny Vittori. This has been the Lynn Lowdown, and we'll see you next week with more guests.